CEO is about to sign the deal of his life when a janitor's son runs in and says, "Don't sign that contract. I understood what he said in German. Just before we start, drop a flag emoji that represents your country." Robert Blackwood's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. After 35 years of building Horizon Enterprises from nothing, today would cement his legacy. The German conglomerate Weisskraft had offered $2.3 billion for a merger that would save his struggling company and secure retirement for his 300 loyal employees. "Everyone's ready, sir," Margaret whispered, his executive assistant of 20 years gently touching his arm. "The Germans are waiting in the boardroom." Robert nodded, taking a deep breath. "This is it, Maggie. Everything we've worked for." The mahogany doors of the boardroom swung open to reveal 5 stern-faced Germans in immaculate suits. At their center sat Heinrich Müller, CEO of Weisskraft, his silver hair perfectly combed, blue eyes calculating beneath bushy eyebrows. "Herr Blackwood," Heinrich rose, extending his hand. "Today is a good day, yes, for both our companies." Robert forced a smile, shaking Heinrich's hand firmly. "Indeed it is." The legal teams exchanged pleasantries, while assistants distributed contract copies. Robert's lawyer, James, gave him a reassuring nod from across the table. 6 months of negotiations had led to this moment, the lifeline his company desperately needed. Heinrich's translator, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood quietly in the corner as the Germans occasionally spoke among themselves in their native tongue. Robert caught fragments, Unterschrift, signature, and Vertrag, contract, from his college German classes. "If there are no questions," Heinrich said, uncapping an elegant fountain pen, "shall we proceed to signatures?" Robert reached for his own pen, heart pounding. The first signature would be his, followed by Heinrich's. One stroke of ink away from saving everything he'd built. The boardroom door burst open. A small girl with wild auburn curls and a gap-toothed smile stood in the doorway, her blue overalls smudged with crayon marks, 7 years old at most. Breathing heavily as if she'd been running. "Emily!" A man's panicked voice echoed from the hallway. "You can't go in there!" The girl, Emily, locked eyes with Robert. "Don't sign that paper," she shouted, her voice surprisingly commanding for such a small person. Chaos erupted. Margaret rushed toward the child. Heinrich barked something in German. Security appeared in the doorway behind a mortified-looking man in a grey maintenance uniform. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood," the man said, reaching for his daughter. "Emily, you know you're not supposed to leave the break room." "But Daddy!" the girl protested, dodging her father's grasp and running straight to Robert. "The men with the funny voices. I heard them talking when they walked past the janitor's closet." Robert stared down at the child, bewildered. "Young lady, this is a private meeting." "They're going to take your company and fire everyone," Emily declared, pointing at Heinrich. "He said so in German. He said once you sign, they'll own everything and can do whatever they want." The room fell silent. Heinrich's face remained impassive, but Robert noticed his translator's face had gone pale. "What an imagination," Heinrich finally said with a tight smile. "Children and their fantasies." The maintenance man finally caught his daughter's hand. "I'm so sorry, sir. My babysitter cancelled and—" Robert raised his hand, silencing the man. Something in the girl's earnest expression made him pause. "How do you know German, young lady?" "My mommy taught me before she went to heaven," Emily said, her chin lifting with pride. "She knew lots of languages." Robert looked from the girl to Heinrich, whose smile had hardened to granite. The fountain pen in Robert's hand suddenly felt heavier than before. "Perhaps," Robert said slowly, "we should take a short recess." "I need everyone to clear the room," Robert announced, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Everyone except Mr. Müller, his translator, and my legal counsel." Heinrich's face darkened. "This is highly irregular, Herr Blackwood." So is a 7-year-old girl making accusations about merger terms, Robert countered. 15 minutes, that's all I ask. The German executives exchanged glances before reluctantly filing out. Margaret gently guided the maintenance man and his daughter toward the door. But Robert called out, "The child stays." Emily's father looked alarmed. "Sir, I don't think—" "Just outside the door, please," Robert said, softening his tone. "I won't be long with her." When the room had emptied except for the 4 adults and Emily, Robert knelt to the girl's eye level. "Emily, is it? I'm Robert." "What exactly did you hear these gentlemen say?" Emily twisted a curl around her finger. "The tall one with white hair said, sobald unterschreibt, werden wir die Firma ausschlachten und die Hälfte der Mitarbeiter entlassen." The translator flinched visibly. Heinrich remained stone-faced. "And what does that mean?" Robert asked gently. "It means, once he signs, we'll gut the company and fire half the employees," Emily translated, her pronunciation flawless despite her missing front tooth. Robert slowly rose to his feet, turning to Heinrich. "Is this true?" Heinrich scoffed. "You would take the word of a child, a janitor's daughter playing games." "Oh, Jude, she seems to know German quite well," Robert observed. "James, the section on workforce retention, could you review it again?" James, Robert's attorney, flipped through the contract pages with newfound urgency. After a tense minute, he looked up. "It's ambiguous. The English translation guarantees positions for senior management, but the binding German version uses language that could be interpreted as allowing significant workforce optimization immediately post-merger." "A standard clause," Heinrich dismissed. "Legal formality only." "Then you won't mind clarifying it," Robert replied, ice in his voice. "And explaining why your private conversations contradict your public assurances." Heinrich's smile vanished. "I think we're done here." He barked something in rapid German to his translator, who began gathering their documents. Robert turned to Emily, who was watching with wide eyes. "Thank you, young lady. You may have just saved 300 jobs." As Heinrich stormed toward the door, he paused beside Emily. "Clever little girl," he muttered. "Too clever for your own good." Something in his tone made Robert step protectively toward Emily, but Heinrich was already gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. What had begun as the most important day of Robert's career had transformed into something far more complicated and potentially dangerous. Emily's father, who introduced himself as Frank Wilson, couldn't stop apologizing. "I never imagined she'd burst in like that. My wife was a linguistics professor before she passed last year." Emily picked up languages like breathing. Robert waved away his concerns. "Your daughter may have saved my company from disaster. The question is, what do I do now?" The boardroom had emptied except for Robert, Margaret, James, and the Wilsons. Emily sat at the massive conference table, legs swinging, coloring on the back of a discarded meeting agenda. "You can't sign that contract," James advised, loosening his tie. "But without this merger, we're still facing bankruptcy in 6 months." Margaret, who had been unusually quiet, cleared her throat. "What about Patricia Chen?" Robert frowned. "The venture capitalist? She turned us down 3 months ago." "Because she didn't trust Weiskraft's involvement," Margaret reminded him. "She said any deal with Heinrich Müller would eventually turn toxic." Frank Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "I should get Emily home." "Wait," Robert said suddenly. "Frank, how long have you worked here?" "Almost 9 years, sir. Started right after Emily was born." "And you've been all over this building, heard things, seen things?" Frank nodded cautiously. "Part of the job, I suppose." Robert leaned forward. "I need honest opinions from people who aren't afraid to lose corner offices or stock options. Would you be willing to help me?" Before Frank could answer, Emily piped up. "The man with white hair was talking on his phone in the bathroom yesterday. He said something about patents." All eyes turned to her. What about patents, sweetheart? Robert asked. He said your special medicine patents were the real prize, Emily replied, not looking up from her coloring. The rest was. She frowned, searching for the translation. Scrap metal, James paled. The cancer drug research, that's what they're after. The rest is just a smoke screen, Robert finished, his mind racing. 3 decades of work, hundreds of careers, all reduced to a patent grab. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You're making a mistake. Some deals can't be walked away from. Reconsider. Robert showed the message to James, whose expression grew grave. They're not going to just walk away, Robert. Neither am I, Robert said, a plan forming. Margaret, cancel my appointments for the week. James, get me everything on Vicecraft's recent acquisitions. And Frank. He turned to the maintenance man. How would you feel about a temporary promotion? Frank blinked in surprise. Sir, I need someone I can trust, someone invisible to the corporate world, someone with a very special consultant who speaks German. Emily looked up from her drawing, eyes bright with excitement. Robert smiled at them both. How would you two like to help me save Horizon Enterprises? Patricia Chen's office overlooked Central Park, 38 floors above Manhattan. The venture capitalist hadn't changed since Robert last saw her. Same sharp bob cut, same piercing gaze that seemed to calculate your net worth with a glance. You refused my help 3 months ago, she said, leaning back in her chair. Now you're desperate. I'm realistic, Robert countered, and I've discovered information that changes everything. Frank stood awkwardly beside him in an ill-fitting suit borrowed from James. Emily sat quietly in the reception area, under Margaret's watchful eye. Patricia raised an eyebrow. And you brought your janitor because... Facilities manager, Robert corrected smoothly. Frank has unique insights into our operation. Frank cleared his throat. Ms. Chen, I've worked at Horizon for 9 years. I know every corner of that building, every conversation in break rooms, every complaint in hallways. The employees aren't just afraid of losing jobs, they're afraid of losing purpose. Patricia's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened with interest. Our cancer research isn't just valuable intellectually, Robert continued. It's personal for our team. Half of them joined because cancer took someone they loved. They work overtime without being asked. That dedication is what Vicecraft wants to strip and sell for parts. Touching, Patricia said, though her tone had softened slightly. But sentiment doesn't generate returns. Loyalty does, Frank interjected, surprising Robert. My wife died of the exact cancer Horizon is researching. You think I wouldn't walk through fire for this company? Every janitor, secretary, and lab tech feels the same. Patricia studied Frank for a long moment before turning back to Robert. You need $300 million to remain solvent and fund the final research phase. That's a hefty investment for loyalty. We also have this, Robert said, sliding a folder across her desk. Preliminary results. Our board doesn't even know about yet. Our treatment is showing 87% efficacy in stage 3 trials. Patricia's composure slipped for an instant as she scanned the documents. This is significant. 2 months from FDA fast-track approval, Robert confirmed. Vicecraft somehow found out. That's what they really want. Patricia closed the folder. And you need my money to hold them off until then. I need a partner who sees beyond the next quarterly report, Robert corrected. Vicecraft isn't just competing with us. They're threatening us. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Threatening how? Robert showed her the text message. They're escalating. This morning, our head researcher found his lab access revoked. System glitch, apparently. Corporate espionage is one thing, Patricia said, but this sounds like they're scared, Frank interrupted, because they know what we have could revolutionize cancer treatment. Patricia fell silent, tapping her manicured nails against the folder. Finally, she pressed her intercom. Cancel my afternoon and send in the little girl from reception. I understand she speaks German. Robert exchanged surprised glances with Frank. "If I'm considering an investment of this magnitude," Patricia explained, "I want to hear exactly what Heinrich Müller said, from the source." As they waited for Emily to join them, Patricia fixed Robert with a penetrating stare. "You realize, if I do this, I'll own 40% of your company." 30%, Robert countered, "with a seat on the board." 35, Patricia returned, "and I choose which seat." Robert hesitated, then nodded. "Deal." Neither noticed the cleaning woman, who slipped out of the adjacent bathroom, phone in hand, quietly sending a text. The research lab on Horizon's third floor buzzed with activity despite the late hour. Dr. Alan Myers, head of oncology research, peered through his microscope with the concentration of a man half his 68 years. "You're sure about this, Robert?" he asked, not looking up. "Chen Capital is notoriously controlling with their investments." "More controlling than being dismantled by Germans," Robert countered, watching the scientists work. The lab had been his pride since founding Horizon, state-of-the-art equipment dedicated to finding what had eluded his wife's doctors 20 years earlier. "Point taken," Alan conceded, finally meeting Robert's gaze. "It's just, we're so close. 6 years of research, thousands of tests, another month and we could have announcements ready." Which is exactly why Weisscraft wants us now," Robert said. "Patricia's investment buys us time and protection." Alan removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "And you learned all this because a janitor's daughter speaks German?" "Facilities manager," Robert corrected automatically. "And yes, strange how fate works, isn't it?" The conversation halted as Frank Wilson appeared at the lab entrance, his expression tense. "Mr. Blackwood, there's something you should see." Robert followed Frank to the security office, where monitors displayed every corner of the building. Frank pointed to one screen showing the executive parking garage. "That's your car," Frank said. "Watch." On the grainy footage, a figure in dark clothing approached Robert's Mercedes, quickly sliding underneath. 30 seconds later, they re-emerged and disappeared into the shadows. "When was this?" Robert demanded, pulse quickening. 20 minutes ago, Frank answered. "I've already called the police and bomb squad." "Bomb squad?" Robert felt suddenly lightheaded. "Standard procedure," Frank assured him, though his voice lacked conviction. "Could be nothing, but after everything with Weisscraft." Within an hour, the parking garage had been evacuated. Robert watched from behind police tape as officers carefully examined his vehicle. Not a bomb. The technician eventually reported emerging from beneath the car, "But this was attached to your fuel line." He held up a small electronic device. "Would have disabled your car on a remote signal. Probably when you were somewhere inconvenient, like a highway." "An accident that's not an accident," Margaret murmured. She had refused to go home, despite Robert's insistence. Robert's phone buzzed with another text. "Accidents happen every day. Some are preventable. Reconsider our offer by noon tomorrow." "That settles it," Robert said, showing them the message. "We're moving forward with Patricia. And we need security for everyone involved, especially Frank and Emily." As if summoned by her name, Frank's phone rang. The color drained from his face as he listened. "What is it?" Robert asked when Frank lowered the phone. "The neighbor watching Emily," Frank said, his voice hollow. "Someone tried to break into my apartment 15 minutes ago." "Emily's okay. They ran when the neighbor called out. But—" Robert placed a steadying hand on Frank's shoulder. "Get Emily. Both of you are staying at my place tonight. It has a security system and doorman." "This is insane," Frank protested weakly. "We're not family. We're not even—" "You're Horizon employees," Robert cut him off. "And Horizon protects its own." What had begun as a corporate takeover attempt had escalated into something far more sinister. As Robert stared at his compromised vehicle, he couldn't help wondering how far would Heinrich Müller go to get what he wanted. You're absolutely certain? Patricia Chen's voice was tense, even through the phone speaker. The police confirmed it, Robert replied, pacing the living room of his penthouse apartment. And the break-in at Frank's place happened simultaneously. It was past midnight. Frank and Emily had finally fallen asleep in his guest rooms after a chaotic evening of police reports and hurried packing. This changes things, Patricia said. Corporate strong-arm tactics are one thing, endangering lives is another. Are you backing out? Robert felt a stab of panic. The opposite, Patricia replied, surprising him. I'm expediting the investment. The funds will be in your account by morning. But we need to move your research to secure facilities immediately. Robert sank onto his sofa, relief washing over him. Thank you, Patricia. Don't thank me yet, she cautioned. This is no longer just business. Müller must have informants inside Horizon to coordinate those attacks. Trust no one until we identify them. After ending the call, Robert walked to the guest room where Emily slept. The door was ajar, and he could see her small form beneath the covers, auburn curls splayed across the pillow. An unexpected protective instinct surged through him. A soft voice startled him. She finally stopped asking questions long enough to fall asleep. Frank stood in the hallway, looking exhausted in borrowed pajamas. She's remarkable, Robert said quietly. Reminds me of my daughter at that age. Frank's eyebrows rose. I didn't know you had children. Had, Robert corrected, a familiar ache in his chest. Caroline would be 32 now. She and her mother died in a car accident when she was 8. I'm sorry, Frank said simply. Emily lost her mother to cancer last year. Some days are harder than others. Robert nodded, understanding the unspoken weight of single parenthood. Your daughter saved 300 jobs today, possibly lives. I won't forget that. She's all I have, Frank said, his voice cracking slightly. If anything happened to her because of this... It won't, Robert assured him, with more confidence than he felt. We'll figure this out together. His phone vibrated again. Expecting another threat, he was surprised to see Margaret's name. Sir, she said urgently when he answered. Someone's accessed the research server. They're downloading files right now. Robert straightened. Have security locked down the building. Already done, Margaret replied. But there's more. The access credentials belong to Dr. Myers. Alan Myers, his friend of 20 years, head researcher, the man who'd stood beside him at his wife's funeral. That's impossible, Robert insisted. Alan wouldn't... The system doesn't lie, Margaret cut in, and security cameras show him entering the lab an hour ago. Frank, who had been listening, said quietly, Emily mentioned something earlier, about hearing 2 men speaking German in the hallway outside the research lab yesterday. One was Heinrich. She thought the other was a doctor because of the white coat. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Alan's reluctance about Patricia's investment, his convenient absence during board discussions about Weisskraft, the subtle pressure to accept the German offer. We need to get to the lab, Robert said, already moving toward his bedroom to change. If Alan's copying the research... What about Emily? Frank asked. We can't leave her alone. Robert paused, torn between the urgent threat to his company and the safety of a child who'd risked everything to help him. Bring her, he decided. She'll be safer with us than anywhere else right now. As Frank went to wake his daughter, Robert's phone buzzed with a final message that turned his blood cold. Too late to reconsider. We already have what we need. Say goodbye to everything you've built. The battle for Horizon Enterprises had entered its most dangerous phase, and the stakes were no longer measured in dollars, but in lives. The Horizon Enterprises building stood silent in the 2 a.m. darkness, emergency lights casting eerie shadows across deserted hallways. Robert, Frank, and a sleepy Emily moved cautiously toward the research lab, guided by Margaret's updates through Robert's earpiece. He's still there, Margaret confirmed from the security room. Hasn't left the main lab. I've disabled his access to the server, but he's already downloaded significant data. Robert felt each step like lead. Alan Myers had been more than his head researcher. He'd been a friend who held Robert's hand at his wife's deathbed, who'd sworn to continue the cancer research that might have saved her. Emily should wait here, Frank whispered as they approached the lab corridor. It could be dangerous. Emily, remarkably alert despite the hour, shook her head stubbornly. I want to help. You've helped enough, sweetheart, Robert assured her, kneeling to her eye level. But your dad's right, this is grown-up business now. A crash from inside the lab ended the discussion. Robert motioned for Frank to stay with Emily while he edged forward alone, peering through the lab door's small window. Inside, Alan was frantically gathering external hard drives and research notebooks, stuffing them into a duffel bag. His distinguished face, usually calm and methodical, was contorted with panic. When the lab phone rang, he nearly jumped out of his skin before answering it. Yes, I've got it all, Alan said in a strained voice, but they've locked me out of the server. No, I can't get more because they know. Someone must have. He listened, face paling. That wasn't our agreement. You promised no one would be hurt. My God, what have you done to him? Hello, Heinrich! Robert had heard enough. He pushed open the door and Alan spun around, phone dropping from his hand. Robert! Alan gasped. I can explain. Save it, Robert cut him off, advancing slowly. How much did they pay you, Alan? What was the price of our friendship, of Caroline's memory? Alan's shoulders slumped. You don't understand. They have my son. Robert stopped cold. What? Michael disappeared 3 weeks ago in Berlin, Alan explained, voice breaking. Backpacking after graduation. Then Heinrich contacted me with proof he was alive, but he swallowed hard. They said they'd kill him if I didn't help them acquire Horizon's research. Robert's mind reeled. Michael Myers. He'd watched the boy grow up, sent him birthday cards, attended his high school graduation. Why didn't you come to me? They were monitoring everything, calls, emails, said they'd know if I told anyone. Alan gestured helplessly at the bag. I thought if I just gave them what they wanted, they'd let him go. But now... He looked at the dropped phone with horror. I think they're going to kill him anyway. Before Robert could respond, Frank burst in with Emily in tow. Someone's coming! Security camera showed 4 men entering the building. They've disabled the front desk guard. Robert's pulse quickened. Weisscraft's cleanup crew. They're eliminating loose ends. Alan paled further. Including me. And us, if they find us here. Robert realized. We need to move, now. Where? Frank demanded, clutching Emily close. If they've disabled security... The sub-basement, Alan said suddenly. The old storage area behind the backup generators. It's not on current building plans. Lead the way, Robert ordered, grabbing the duffel bag from Alan. And Alan, if you're playing us... My son's life is at stake, Alan replied, eyes haunted. I've made a terrible mistake. But I'm trying to fix it. As they hurried from the lab, Emily tugged at her father's sleeve. Daddy, the bad men are speaking on radios. I can hear them. Everyone froze, listening. From somewhere in the building came the faint crackle of communication devices and the unmistakable cadence of German commands. They're searching floor by floor. Emily translated, her young face serious. The white-haired man told them to leave no witnesses. Frank lifted Emily into his arms. How far to this sub-basement? Service elevator at the end of the hall, Alan whispered. If we can reach it unseen. Robert's phone vibrated. A text from Margaret. Intruders on your floor. East stairwell. Run. They barely made it around the corner before the stairwell door burst open. Heavy footsteps echoed behind them as they raced toward the service elevator, Frank carrying Emily, Robert supporting Alan, who struggled to keep pace. Inside the elevator, Alan punched the sub-basement button repeatedly while Robert forced the doors closed, just as flashlight beams swept around the corner. The descent seemed eternal, their ragged breathing the only sound. Emily buried her face in her father's shoulder, and Robert was struck by how quickly this child had become central to their survival. "What exactly is your research?" Frank asked Alan as they descended. "Why would someone kidnap your son and try to kill us for it?" Alan and Robert exchanged glances. "It's not just cancer treatment," Robert admitted. "It's a breakthrough delivery method for genetic therapies. Cancer is just the beginning. The applications could revolutionize medicine for dozens of currently untreatable conditions. Worth billions in the right hands," Alan added grimly, "or much more in the wrong ones." The elevator shuddered to a stop. When the doors opened, they faced absolute darkness. "Perfect hiding spot," Frank muttered. "We can't see a thing." Alan fumbled in his pocket, producing a small flashlight. "This way, stay close." As they navigated through dusty corridors filled with forgotten equipment, Emily suddenly stopped walking. "Someone's already down here," she whispered. The adults froze, straining to hear. "I don't hear anything," Frank said uncertainly. "There," Emily insisted, pointing ahead into the darkness beyond Alan's flashlight beam. "Someone's breathing." Alan cautiously directed the light where she pointed. The beam illuminated a slumped figure chained to a pipe, a young man with Alan's nose and jawline, face bruised and bloody. "Michael!" Alan cried, rushing forward. Robert caught his arm. "Wait." It could be a trap, but Alan broke free, running to his son. "Michael, can you hear me?" The young man's eyes fluttered open. "Dad?" he croaked, voice barely audible. "How did you?" Before Alan could respond, bright lights suddenly flooded the area. Standing at the entrance to the storage room was Heinrich Müller, flanked by 4 armed men. "How convenient," Heinrich said, his German accent thicker than in the boardroom. "Everyone I need to eliminate gathered in one place." Heinrich Müller moved into the storage room with the casual confidence of a man who had already won. His henchmen spread out, weapons trained on the group. "I must thank you, Dr. Myers," Heinrich said. "You've made this much easier than anticipated." Alan stood protectively in front of his semi-conscious son. "You said you'd release him if I cooperated." Heinrich shrugged. "Business often requires flexibility in negotiations. Surely, as scientists, you understand the concept of expendable test subjects." Robert positioned himself slightly in front of Frank and Emily. "This isn't business, Heinrich. It's criminal." "A matter of perspective," Heinrich replied. "In my view, it's foolish for a struggling company to possess research worth billions while teetering on bankruptcy. The market corrects such inefficiencies. By kidnapping and murder?" Frank interjected, his arms tight around Emily. Heinrich's cold gaze shifted to Frank. "The janitor who fancies himself important, and his inconvenient multilingual daughter." He sighed dramatically. "Children should be seen, not heard, especially in boardrooms." Emily, despite her fear, met Heinrich's stare defiantly. "What exactly is your plan here?" Robert demanded. "Kill us all in the basement of my company? You'll never get away with it." Heinrich chuckled. "A regrettable gas leak will claim your lives while you worked late trying to save your failing company. Meanwhile, Weisskraft's subsidiary offers to purchase your distressed assets, including your remarkable research. Tragic but efficient." As Heinrich spoke, Robert noticed Emily whispering something to her father. Frank's expression changed subtly as he listened. "There's just one problem with your plan," Robert said, trying to keep Heinrich's attention. "The research data is gone. I purged the servers remotely when I realized what was happening." Heinrich's smile faltered. "Then we'll take what Dr. Myers has already copied." "Not enough for what you need," Alan spoke up, seeming to catch on to Robert's bluff. "The complete genomic sequencing data wasn't included in that download." Heinrich's expression hardened. "Then you will provide the missing information." "That would require me to live," Alan pointed out. Behind Heinrich, Robert noticed one of the guards shifting position, eyeing the duffel bag of research materials on the floor nearby. Emily tugged at her father's sleeve again, whispering more urgently. Frank's eyes widened. "Your guards are discussing something interesting," Frank said suddenly. Heinrich didn't bother looking back. "My men speak only when instructed." "They've been talking in German this whole time," Frank continued. "My daughter says they're arguing about whether to kill you too." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Heinrich's face. He said something sharp in German to his men, who responded with blank stares. "The bald one just told the others that your usefulness ended when Berlin authorized the operation," Emily translated, her voice small but clear. "He said, there's no reason to split the money 5 ways when it could be 4. Heinrich's composure cracked. He turned slightly toward his men, creating the momentary distraction Robert needed. In one fluid motion, Robert lunged for the nearest fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, ripped it free, and activated it directly at Heinrich and his guards. Chaos erupted as white chemical powder filled the air. Robert shouted, "Run!" as he continued spraying, creating a blinding cloud. Frank scooped up Emily and bolted for a narrow corridor Alan had indicated earlier. Alan struggled to help his injured son to his feet. Robert backed away, still deploying the extinguisher until it emptied, then threw it toward the sound of confused shouting. Gunshots rang out, bullets ricocheting off pipes. Robert turned and ran, catching up to Alan and helping support Michael's weight as they stumbled down the dimly lit passage. "There's a maintenance exit that leads to the loading dock," Alan gasped as they ran. "If we can reach it." They rounded a corner to find Frank and Emily waiting by a heavy metal door marked "Emergency Exit Only." "It's alarmed," Frank warned. "That might work in our favor," Robert replied. "Once we trigger it, we'll have seconds before they reach us. We make straight for my car in the executive lot." "Your car was tampered with, remember?" Frank reminded him. "Backup key in my office opens my wife's old Volvo," Robert explained. "Still in the garage. Hasn't been driven in years, but it should start." Alan adjusted his grip on his semi-conscious son. "Ready when you are." Robert nodded at Frank. "On 3. 1, 2. The door burst open before Frank could touch it. Standing in the doorway was Margaret, breathing hard, a security access card in her hand. "Margaret!" Robert gasped. "No time to explain," she said, ushering them through. "Security staff found the disabled guard and called the police. They're on their way, but we need to move now." As they hurried through the loading dock toward the parking garage, Emily suddenly cried out, "Stop!" Everyone halted instinctively. A second later, a shot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in a concrete pillar inches from where Robert would have been. Heinrich emerged from the shadows, alone now, his suit disheveled, face streaked with extinguisher powder and eyes wild with fury. His gun remained pointed at the group. "You've ruined everything," he snarled. "Years of planning, millions invested." Behind Heinrich, Robert could see flashing police lights approaching the building. "It's over, Heinrich," Robert said calmly. "The police are already here." "Then I have nothing to lose," Heinrich replied, his finger tightening on the trigger as he aimed directly at Robert. What happened next occurred so quickly that Robert would later struggle to recall the sequence. Margaret threw herself sideways, knocking Robert off balance. Emily screamed. Frank lunged forward. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, and Heinrich Müller crumpled to the ground, a security guard standing behind him with a taser still extended. "Mr. Blackwood!" the guard exclaimed. "Are you all right, sir?" Robert nodded numbly, helping Margaret to her feet. "Everyone okay?" Frank was holding Emily tightly, both shaken but unharmed. Alan was supporting Michael, who appeared more alert now, staring at Heinrich's unconscious form. "He was going to kill us all," Michael said hoarsely. "Just like he killed my friends in Berlin when they accidentally saw his real business." "What real business?" Robert asked. Michael's haunted eyes met his. "Weisscraft isn't just a technology conglomerate. They're developing biological weapons using modified gene therapy techniques. exactly the delivery system your research perfected. As police officers swarmed the scene, Robert looked from Michael to Alan to Emily, the unlikely heroes who had prevented not just corporate theft, but potentially something far more sinister. Emily tugged at Robert's sleeve. "Are the bad men gone now?" she asked, her young voice trembling slightly despite her brave face. Robert knelt beside her. "Yes, sweetheart, thanks to you they are." But as he watched Heinrich being handcuffed and led away, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over, that somewhere powerful people were already planning their next move. Robert stared out his office window at the Manhattan skyline, the morning sun gilding the glass towers. 48 hours had passed since the confrontation with Heinrich Müller. The immediate danger had passed, but the ripples continued to spread outward. "The German authorities have frozen Weisskraft's assets pending investigation," James reported, setting a thick folder on Robert's desk. "Interpol is involved now, given the international nature of the crimes." "And Heinrich?" Robert asked. "Denied bail. The evidence from Michael Myers and the recovered communications on Heinrich's phone provide enough to hold him." James adjusted his glasses. "Though his lawyers are already claiming he was a scapegoat for others higher up?" Robert nodded, unsurprised. "And how is Michael doing?" "Recovering at Manhattan General. Physical injuries will heal faster than the psychological ones, I expect." James hesitated. "There's something else you should know. The FBI wants to talk to you about implementing extraordinary protection measures for your research. If what Michael says is true about biological weapons applications, it would explain the extreme methods," Robert finished, rubbing his temples. 24 hours without sleep was catching up with him. A soft knock interrupted them. Margaret entered, looking nearly as exhausted as Robert felt. "Patricia Chen is on line 1, she announced. "And Frank Wilson is here with his daughter." Robert straightened in his chair. "Send Frank in. Tell Patricia I'll call her back." When Margaret closed the door, James leaned forward. "Are you sure bringing Frank deeper into this is wise? He's a maintenance worker, Robert. He's a single father who risked everything to help save this company." Robert corrected firmly. "And his daughter is the reason we're all still here." James looked like he wanted to argue, but simply nodded and gathered his papers as Frank and Emily entered. Emily looked different today, less the frightened child from the storage room confrontation and more a curious 7-year-old. Wide-eyed at being in the CEO's office, she wore a yellow sundress and clutched a dog-eared book of German fairy tales. "Mr. Blackwood," Frank began awkwardly, "we wanted to thank you for everything, the hotel room, the security detail. It's been overwhelming. Please, it's Robert, and I should be thanking you both." He smiled at Emily. "How are you doing, young lady?" Emily considered the question with endearing seriousness. "I had a nightmare about the man with white hair," she admitted. "But Daddy said he can't hurt us now." "Your father's right," Robert assured her. "Would you like to see something cool while your dad and I talk?" "Margaret has a special computer that can make 3D models of molecules." Emily's eyes lit up, and after Frank's approving nod, Margaret led her out to the executive assistant's desk, visible through the glass wall. Once alone with Frank, Robert's expression grew serious. "The FBI believes Heinrich's organization might retaliate against key witnesses. They've recommended protective custody for you and Emily." Frank paled. "For how long?" "Until the trial. Possibly longer." Robert walked to his window, watching Emily outside as she marveled at Margaret's computer display. "I know it's disruptive, but Emily's testimony, connecting Heinrich to the kidnapping and murder conspiracy, is crucial." Frank ran a hand through his hair. "We can't just disappear, Robert. Emily's already lost so much stability. Her school, our apartment." "I understand completely," Robert said, turning back to face him. "That's why I have an alternative proposal." He retrieved a folder from his desk and handed it to Frank. Horizon Enterprises has a research facility in Colorado Springs. Mountain air, excellent security, top-rated elementary schools. We need someone to oversee facilities management there. Frank opened the folder to find employment papers, housing information, and school enrollment forms. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Robert urged. The salary's triple what you make now, plus relocation expenses and a company house on a protected compound. Most importantly, you and Emily would be safe while still maintaining a normal life. Frank studied the papers, visibly overwhelmed. This feels like charity. It's business, Robert countered. I need someone I can trust implicitly at that facility. Someone who sees details others miss. Someone who's proven their loyalty and quick thinking under pressure. He smiled slightly. The fact that his daughter speaks 5 languages is just a bonus. 4 languages, Frank corrected automatically, and she's only fluent in German and Spanish. The Mandarin and French are still elementary. Even more impressive, Robert said sincerely. Frank, I lost my family years ago. In the decades since, I built Horizon thinking success would fill that void. It never did. What nearly happened this week has shown me what truly matters. Not mergers or stock prices, but people. The lives we touch, the differences we make. Through the glass, they could see Emily giggling as Margaret showed her something on the computer. Your wife taught languages? Robert asked. Frank nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. Professor of Germanic and Romance languages at Columbia. She would have been so proud to see Emily use her German to help people. She'd also want her daughter safe, Robert pointed out gently. Frank took a deep breath. When would we leave? Corporate jet can have you there this evening. Everything you need will be provided until your apartment can be packed up. And what about you? Frank asked. Aren't you at risk too? Robert smiled grimly. I'll be joining you in Colorado next week, once Patricia's investment is finalized. The FBI thinks it best if Horizon's cancer research continues somewhere less accessible. Frank extended his hand. Then I guess we're going to Colorado. As they shook hands, Emily came bounding back into the office. Mr. Robert! Margaret showed me the cancer molecules your company is fixing. They look like tiny stars. Robert knelt to her level, suddenly emotional. That's exactly right, Emily. Like stars that lost their way. We're helping them shine correctly again. Emily beamed. My mom had stars that got lost. She said the doctors couldn't fix them in time. The simple clarity of the child's words struck Robert deeply. Your mom was a very smart woman, and I think she'd be very proud of you right now. I know, Emily said with complete certainty. She's watching me from heaven. She told me to be brave and help people when I can. Robert glanced up at Frank, who was blinking back tears. In that moment, a bond formed between them all. Not employer and employee, not CEO and janitor, but 3 people connected by loss, courage, and an unexpected second chance. As security arrived to escort Frank and Emily to prepare for their departure, Robert turned back to the window, gazing at the city stretched below. For the first time in years, he felt something long dormant awakening within him, hope. His phone rang. Patricia Chen calling back. The future of Horizon Enterprises awaited his decision. But now that future seemed filled with purpose beyond profit margins and stock options. A future where a little girl with auburn curls might grow up in a world where cancer was no longer a death sentence. Robert answered the phone, ready to build that future. Colorado, in autumn, painted the research facility grounds in fiery reds and golds. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Heinrich Müller, and Horizon's relocated research center hummed with renewed purpose. Robert walked the perimeter path with Frank, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. What had begun as a professional relationship had evolved into genuine friendship. Their daily walks now a routine both men valued. Emily's teacher says she's adjusting well. Frank reported as they rounded the meadow bordering the facility. Top of her class in everything except math. Robert smiled. Not surprising. How many second graders can serve as translators for international research teams? Emily had become something of a mascot for the facility, brightening the halls after school with her curious questions and irrepressible energy. Even the most serious scientists couldn't resist her charm. "She wanted me to invite you to dinner tonight," Frank said. "She's attempting spaghetti for the first time. Consider yourself warned." "I'll bring my fireproof suit," Robert joked, then grew serious. "Any word from the FBI about Heinrich's trial date?" Frank shook his head. "Just that it's being delayed again. Something about new evidence coming to light." They reached the security gate leading back to the research buildings. Robert scanned his badge, and the guard nodded them through with a respectful, "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Wilson." "Still feels strange," Frank admitted as they walked. "People treating me like I belong in management." "You do belong," Robert replied. "Your facilities team runs more efficiently than any department. Patricia mentioned it specifically in the last board meeting." Frank looked pleased, but embarrassed by the praise. "Speaking of Patricia, is she still arriving tomorrow?" "Weather permitting. There's a storm system moving in." Robert checked his watch. "I should get to the lab. Alan's presenting the latest trial results this morning." They parted ways at the main lobby, Frank heading to his operations office, while Robert took the elevator to the research floor. The transformation in Alan Myers was remarkable. With his son safe and recovering, now working alongside his father as a research assistant, Alan had thrown himself into the cancer therapy project with renewed vigor. Gone was the haunted, desperate man from the confrontation with Heinrich. In his place stood the brilliant scientist Robert had always known. "Just in time," Alan greeted him as Robert entered the conference room. "We're about to begin." The room was filled with researchers, all focused on the presentation screen where molecular models rotated in 3 dimensions. Patricia Chen sat in the corner, her expression characteristically neutral, but her presence indicating the importance of today's meeting. Alan didn't waste time with preambles. "We've achieved 93% efficacy in the final trial stage," he announced, triggering a wave of murmurs. "The FDA has indicated they're moving us to immediate approval review." The room erupted in applause. 3 scientists embraced, tears streaming down their faces. One of them, Robert knew, had lost both parents to the same aggressive cancer their treatment targeted. "There's more," Alan continued when the celebration quieted. "While adapting the delivery mechanism for production scaling, Michael discovered something extraordinary." He nodded to his son. Michael Myers still bore faint scars from his ordeal, but his eyes shone with excitement as he took over the presentation. "We initially thought the quantum entanglement effect in the delivery mechanism was a limitation, the reason treatments needed to be tailored to each patient's genome. But we discovered it's actually the key to something far more significant. The molecular model on screen transformed, the carefully engineered delivery shell opening to reveal its contents. The virus vector doesn't just carry the therapeutic agent," Michael explained. "It carries a quantum signature that can be manipulated remotely." Patricia leaned forward. "Remote manipulation. What does that mean in practical terms?" Michael's expression was a mixture of awe and caution. "It means we could potentially activate, deactivate, or modify treatments after they've been administered. Change dosages without additional injections, adapt to mutations in real time." The implications hung in the air, heavy with both promise and concern. "Or weaponize it," Robert said quietly, "which is what Heinrich wanted all along." Alan nodded grimly. "A delivery system that could be remotely triggered would be the holy grail of biological warfare. Dormant agents that could be activated or deactivated with a signal." The room fell silent as the full weight of their discovery sank in. "This changes everything," Patricia finally said. "The security implications alone." "Which is why we've kept this discovery compartmentalized," Alan assured her. "Only the people in this room know." Robert's phone vibrated with a text message. He glanced down, expecting another update from security, but instead saw a message from Frank. "Need to see you immediately." Emily overheard something important. Robert excused himself, finding Frank and Emily waiting anxiously in the hallway outside the conference room. Emily's face was pale, her usual confidence replaced by evident fear. "Mr. Robert," she said without preamble. The cleaning lady was speaking German on her phone. Robert frowned, kneeling to her level. "People speak many languages, Emily. That doesn't mean—" "She said the quantum key has been confirmed," Emily interrupted, her German pronunciation perfect even in her distress. "And that extraction teams are in position." And Frank placed protective hands on his daughter's shoulders. She was hiding in the supply closet by the East Labs when she heard it. The woman didn't know she was there. "Who is this cleaning person?" Robert demanded, alarm rising. "New contractor," Frank replied. "Started last week, background check cleared, but—" Robert's security badge gave 3 short vibrations, the silent alarm protocol. He pulled out his phone to find messages from multiple staff. "Armed intruders on the perimeter. Security breach in progress. Lockdown initiated." Through the reinforced windows, Robert could see security personnel running toward the east wing. A distant alarm began to sound. "Get Emily to the safe room," Robert ordered Frank. "Now, I'll alert everyone in the conference room." As Frank hurried away with Emily, Robert turned back toward the conference room door, just as the lights throughout the facility flickered and died. Emergency lighting cast the hallway in an ominous red glow as the backup generators engaged. Robert yanked open the conference room door. "We have a security breach. Possible extraction team targeting the research. We need to—" The words died in his throat. The conference room was empty except for Patricia Chen, standing calmly in the center. A small device in her hand that didn't look like any phone Robert recognized. "Where is everyone?" Robert demanded, cold dread washing over him. "I asked for privacy to discuss next steps," Patricia said smoothly. "They're in the adjacent lab, reviewing data." Robert took an instinctive step backward. "Emily overheard one of your people. The quantum key has been confirmed. You're working with Heinrich." Patricia's serene expression didn't change. "Heinrich was a blunt instrument, useful for flushing out the research, but ultimately disposable. This whole thing, the investment, the protection, it was all to get close to the research," Robert realized, horror dawning. "Business is business, Robert," Patricia replied with a small shrug. "Horizon's cancer research is valuable, but the quantum delivery system, that's world-changing technology, worth far more than the pittance I invested." The alarm continued to wail as Robert backed toward the door. "You won't get away with this," Patricia smiled thinly. "I already have. My team is securing the research as we speak. The only question remaining is whether you'll be reasonable about this or force me to add your name to today's casualties." Robert's hand found the door handle behind him. "You underestimate my team, Patricia, and you've particularly underestimated one very special 7-year-old girl." Before Patricia could respond, Robert yanked the door open and ran. Chaos had consumed the research facility. Sprinklers drenched the hallways as Robert raced toward the east wing, alarms blaring overhead. Armed figures in tactical gear swept through intersecting corridors, their commands echoing in multiple languages. Robert ducked into a supply closet as 2 operatives passed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Patricia's betrayal burned like acid in his chest. All these months she'd been the puppet master, using Heinrich as a distraction while positioning herself to steal everything. His phone had no signal. They must be jamming communications. Without digital access, the facility's labyrinthine layout became a maze. Robert needed to reach the safe room where Frank would have taken Emily, but more urgently, he needed to secure or destroy the research data. The primary servers were in the central command hub, but Patricia would have those surrounded. Then Robert remembered. Alan had created a physical backup after the Heinrich incident, a failsafe stored somewhere only he knew. The storage closet's ventilation grate offered a possible path. Robert had learned every inch of this facility during construction, including the maintenance ducts large enough for emergency access. Removing the grate, he hoisted himself into the narrow passage. Crawling through dust and darkness, Robert followed the mental map of the building. Below, through periodic grates, he glimpsed Patricia's team methodically securing the facility, at least 20 operatives moving with military precision. This was no corporate espionage, it was a paramilitary operation. Near the biochemistry lab, he heard Alan's voice, raised in anger. Peering through a vent, Robert saw his friend surrounded by armed guards while Patricia looked on. "You made a critical mistake, Dr. Myers," Patricia was saying. "You should have secured your son more carefully after the Heinrich debacle." Alan's face contorted with fear. "What have you done with Michael?" Patricia checked her watch impatiently. "He's unharmed for now. Cooperate, and he stays that way. The quantum delivery system, Doctor. All your research, all the fail-safes you've undoubtedly built in. I want everything." "Even if I tell you everything, the delivery system has biometric safeguards," Alan replied, voice shaking. "It requires both Robert's and my authentication to access." Patricia smiled coldly. "Then we'll just have to find Robert, won't we?" Robert continued forward, forcing himself to ignore Alan's predicament for now. He needed to reach the backup first. After 15 agonizing minutes navigating the ventilation system, he emerged in the deserted cafeteria kitchen. From there, he slipped through service corridors toward the administrative wing where the safe room was located. The sound of a child's muffled sob stopped him in his tracks. Through a partially open door, Robert glimpsed Emily huddled beneath a desk, alone and terrified. "Emily," he whispered, quickly entering and closing the door behind him. Her tear-streaked face shot up. "Mr. Robert, they took Daddy!" Robert crouched beside her. "Are you hurt? What happened?" "We were going to the safe place," Emily explained between hiccuping sobs. "But the bad people found us. Daddy told me to run and hide while he led them away." Her small hands clutched Robert's sleeve. "They're going to hurt him like they hurt Dr. Michael." "No, they won't," Robert promised, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "Emily, I need your help. Did your dad ever mention a special backup Dr. Myers created? Something hidden?" Emily wiped her eyes, thinking hard. "Daddy said, Doctor. Myers was being extra careful. He put something important in the place where sad people go." Robert frowned. "Sad people. Where you go when you miss someone," Emily clarified, as if it were obvious. "Daddy takes me there when I miss Mommy." Realization dawned. The memorial garden, of course. The small remembrance space created for staff who'd lost loved ones to cancer. Alan would see the symmetry in hiding their most precious research there. "Emily, I need to get something very important from the garden," Robert explained. "Then we'll find your dad and Dr. Myers, but I can't take you with me. It's too dangerous." The fresh tears welled in Emily's eyes. "Don't leave me alone!" Robert's heart clenched. "I'll come back, I promise, but I need you to be brave a little longer. Stay hidden right here." A commotion in the hallway interrupted them, voices approaching. No time left. Robert looked around desperately, then pulled a ventilation grate from the wall. "Emily, I need you to be very brave. Can you climb through here? It leads to the safe room we were trying to reach." Emily looked at the dark opening fearfully but nodded. "Like a secret tunnel." "Exactly. Follow it straight until you see light from another grate. That's the safe room. Can you do that?" "I think so," she whispered. "You are the bravest person I've ever met, Emily Wilson," Robert told her earnestly. "Your mother would be so proud." As Emily disappeared into the ventilation shaft, Robert replaced the grate and positioned himself by the door. The voices were directly outside now. "Check every room on this floor," a woman ordered, Patricia's voice. "The child is our leverage. Find her." Robert's blood boiled. Using a 7-year-old as leverage crossed every line. The door handle turned slowly. He had seconds to decide. Confront Patricia directly or continue to the garden for the backup. The research could save millions of lives, but Emily, Frank, Alan, and Michael needed him now. The door swung open. Robert grabbed the first person through, a startled guard, and slammed him against the wall, wrenching away his weapon. Before the second guard could react, Robert had the gun trained on Patricia. "Call off your people," he demanded, voice deadly calm. "Now!" Patricia raised an eyebrow, seemingly unperturbed by the weapon. "Robert, be reasonable. You're outnumbered and outgunned. This ends only one way." "Maybe," Robert acknowledged, "but I'll make sure you don't live to benefit from it." Something in his eyes must have convinced her he meant it. Patricia raised her hand, signaling her remaining guard to stand down. "Where are Frank Wilson and Alan Myers?" Robert demanded. "Secure for now," Patricia replied, "along with young Michael and the research team, all unharmed, I assure you. Release them immediately." Patricia laughed softly. "You're not in a position to make demands, Robert. Even with that gun, my team has secured the facility. The perimeter is locked down. Law enforcement has been diverted with a convenient terrorist threat elsewhere." "What do you want?" Robert asked, though he already knew. "Full access to the quantum delivery technology, all safeguards removed," Patricia stated. "In exchange, your people walk away unharmed." "And if I refuse?" Patricia's smile chilled him. "We start with the child's father. Then the Myers boy. By the time we reach the little girl, you'll be begging to help us." Robert's finger tightened on the trigger. One bullet could end this threat, but it wouldn't save the others. Patricia's team would still execute their orders. "If you're thinking of shooting me," Patricia added, as if reading his thoughts, "my people have deadman protocols. If I don't check in every 15 minutes, they begin eliminating hostages." A sudden commotion erupted in the hallway, shouts, then gunfire. Patricia's head turned toward the noise, and in that moment of distraction, Robert made his decision. He slammed the weapon into Patricia's temple, sending her crumpling to the floor. The remaining guard reached for his weapon, but froze at the sound of approaching footsteps. "FBI, drop your weapons!" Armed agents in tactical gear flooded the hallway. The guard wisely raised his hands in surrender. Agent Diana Foster, whom Robert recognized from the initial Heinrich investigation, approached with her weapon trained on Patricia's unconscious form. "Sorry we cut it so close, Mr. Blackwood," she said, not taking her eyes off Patricia. "Traffic was a nightmare." "How did you know?" Robert asked, relief making his knees weak. Agent Foster holstered her weapon as her team secured Patricia and the guard. "We've been monitoring Chen Capital since links to Weisscraft emerged during Heinrich's interrogation. When her private security force mobilized this morning, we followed. The others, Frank Wilson, Alan, and Michael Myers, being secured now," Foster assured him. "We're sweeping the building floor by floor." Robert sagged against the wall. "There's a child, Emily Wilson, in the ventilation system, headed for the safe room." Foster immediately dispatched agents to retrieve her. "Mr. Blackwood, we need to get you to a secure location. There may be additional hostiles we haven't contained." But Robert shook his head. "Not until I know everyone is safe," as if summoned by his words. Frank Wilson appeared at the end of the hallway, escorted by FBI agents. His face was bruised, a cut above his eye still bleeding, but he was moving under his own power. "Emily!" he called out, voice cracking with fear. "Where's Emily?" She's safe, Robert assured him, moving to support his friend. Agents are bringing her from the safe room now. Frank gripped Robert's shoulder. They were going to use her to make me talk. If you hadn't, don't think about that now, Robert interrupted gently. It's over. But even as he spoke the reassuring words, Robert caught sight of Patricia Chen regaining consciousness, her eyes locking with his across the hallway. The cold calculation in them told him this was far from over. Some threats couldn't be eliminated with handcuffs and prison sentences. Some enemies were powerful enough to reach through bars and across oceans. As Emily came running down the hallway toward her father, Robert made a silent vow. Whatever came next, he would protect this makeshift family that fate had brought together. The research that had nearly cost them their lives would continue, but with a new purpose, not just curing disease, but healing lives shattered by greed and power. Emily threw herself into her father's arms, and Robert watched their tearful reunion with a bittersweet pang. His own daughter would have been about Emily's age when he lost her and his wife. Perhaps this was his second chance, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it by protecting what remained. Agent Foster approached, her expression grim. Mr. Blackwood, we need to talk about witness protection. 1 year later, the Children's Cancer Ward at Horizon Memorial Hospital buzzed with excitement. Today marked the official opening ceremony, and Emily Wilson, now 8 years old and missing 2 more teeth, clutched the ceremonial scissors with determination. Ready? Robert asked, steadying her hands on the oversized scissors. Emily nodded solemnly. Ready, Uncle Robert? The assembled crowd cheered as Emily cut the ribbon stretched across the entrance. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for posterity, the little girl whose courage had saved not just a company, but potentially millions of lives. Frank Wilson stood nearby, pride evident in his expression. His new position as Director of Operations had transformed him from a man who maintained buildings to one who helped build futures. The transition hadn't always been easy, but like his daughter, Frank had discovered reserves of strength he never knew he possessed. As the crowd dispersed for the reception in the hospital atrium, Robert found himself standing beside Alan Myers. The scientist had aged visibly during the past year. The trauma of nearly losing his son, followed by months of testimony in the international criminal case against Vicecraft and Chen Capital, had left permanent marks. First patient receives treatment tomorrow, Alan said, gazing through the ward's windows where nurses prepared rooms painted with cheerful murals. Hard to believe we actually made it. Thanks to you, Robert acknowledged. And to Michael. Alan nodded toward where his son stood across the atrium, deep in conversation with FBI agent Foster. He's considering her offer to join the Bureau's science division. Says he wants to make sure what happened to him never happens to another researcher. Good for him, Robert said sincerely. How's the security clearance process going? Final approval came through yesterday, Alan confirmed. The quantum delivery system remains classified, but the cancer treatment applications have been fully released for worldwide distribution. Their conversation paused as Emily bounded up, her face flushed with excitement. The children's choir is about to sing, she announced, grabbing both men's hands. You promised you'd listen! Robert allowed himself to be pulled toward the atrium, where a group of young cancer patients had gathered to perform. These children, with their pale faces and bandana-covered heads, represented everything he'd fought for. Some would be among the first to receive Horizon's revolutionary treatment. As the children began to sing, Robert felt a presence beside him. Margaret slipped her hand into his, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a year ago between CEO and executive assistant, but seemed perfectly natural now between two people who had faced death together. Any updates? Robert whispered, referring to the ongoing security concerns. Patricia Chen's appeal was denied, Margaret murmured. 25 years, without possibility of parole. Robert nodded, but the tightness in his chest remained. Patricia's organization had tentacles everywhere. Prison walls couldn't contain her influence completely. "We'll always need to be vigilant," he acknowledged, "but we can't live in fear forever." Yeah. The children finished their song to enthusiastic applause. As the crowd dispersed toward refreshment tables, Emily approached with a small gift-wrapped package. "I made this for you," she told Robert, suddenly shy. Inside was a handcrafted picture frame containing a crayon drawing of 4 figures holding hands: Emily, Frank, Robert, and a woman with angel wings and a golden halo. "That's my mum watching over us," Emily explained, pointing to the angel. "And that's our new family." Robert blinked back unexpected tears. "It's beautiful, Emily. Thank you." Frank approached, resting his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," Robert assured him, carefully placing the drawing in his jacket pocket. "I was just thinking about what an unlikely family we've become." Frank smiled. "Life has a way of bringing together the people we need most." As evening fell, the celebration continued, but Robert slipped away to the hospital's rooftop garden. From there, he could see the lights of the city spreading below, each one representing a life that might someday be saved by what they'd accomplished. His phone vibrated with a notification. The FDA had officially approved Horizon's treatment for widespread use. By this time next year, what had once been a death sentence would become a manageable condition for thousands of patients. Robert thought of his wife and daughter, gone 2 decades now, but still driving everything he did. He thought of Elisa Wilson, Emily's mother, whose language lessons had inadvertently saved them all. He thought of the countless unnamed others whose lives had been cut short by the disease they were now conquering. "We did it," he whispered to the stars. "We really did it." The rooftop door opened and Emily peeked out. "Daddy says it's time for cake. They made it look like a molecule." Robert laughed. "Well, we can't miss that, can we?" "Ooh." As Emily took his hand, leading him back toward the celebration, Robert reflected on how one small voice, one brave interruption, had changed everything. Not just for him, but for the world. Sometimes the most powerful words weren't complicated business jargon or scientific terminology, but simply a child's clear voice saying, "Don't sign that contract."